The best villains are the ones who believe they're the heroes. You've probably heard that before, and it's true, but it doesn't stop there. Because the truly great villains are the ones who make not only themselves, but the entire world believe that they're the hero. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam, and I've always found Garp to be one of the more fascinating One Piece characters. Just the idea of this living legend deeply interconnected with every aspect of the world, whether it be his high-ranking position within the Marines, the fact that his supposed son is the leader of the Revolutionary Army, and the fact that 3 out of 4 Emperors of the Sea were essentially born because Garp decided to punch their rock-based captain in the face. Historically, Garp has had the opportunity to radically change the world on several occasions, and an argument can be made that we only exist in this state because of Garp's actions. For example, if he doesn't stop rocks and save the Celestial Dragons, do we even still have a world government today? Alternatively, if Garp didn't adopt Ace, would Whitebeard still be dead? And of course, if he did not stick his heroic man parts into a very specific person, could the Revolutionary Army never have been born? Not to mention a man who will become the future Pirate King, except I did mention him, so we'll do that. But the world we're living in right now was more or less forged by Garp's moral compass. I have no doubt that every decision Garp made came down to what he thought was the right thing to do at the time. He's not like Sakazuki, who will actively do the wrong thing in order to steer the good ship Justice into better waters, but regardless of the motivation behind it, Garp's legacy doesn't look a whole lot better than Sakazuki's. Is he Garp, the hero of the Marines, valiantly upholding the strong moral values of good society, or is he Garp, the enemy of the world, relentlessly preserving an unimaginably corrupt system of power on his very broad and Garpsome shoulders? I don't even think he knows. Then again, at the age of 78, we can be quite forgetful, and I want you to not be that when it comes to pressing the subscribe button for the Grand Line Review, which will result in consistent injections of One Piece culture being administered directly into your YouTube feed. But as for what Garp is, well, if he doesn't know, then we are left with one option, which is to ask Google. And this wiki article tells me that Garp is an acronym for growth at a reasonable price, an equity investment strategy that combines growth and value investing attributes. I think I may have clicked the wrong link. Or have I? I mean, yes, I have. But this definition of Garp is stunningly accurate to the fictional One Piece character. Growth at a reasonable price. Garp is not some sort of risky GameStop-style investor looking to achieve change in the world through some sort of grand get-rich-quick action. His belief, or I suppose at least his actions, are more along the lines of play within the rules of the existing system and work towards very gradual, perhaps even generational change, which makes him the clear villain of everyone trying to do not that. Like a certain Monkey D. Dragon who has the opposite strategy of going straight for instantaneous change, because people have needs and they need those needs right now. So depending on one's perspective, Garp is either a shining beacon of progress or a stalwart guardian of oppression. Question to ask now though, why is Garp even allowed to Garp? He is by far the mightiest, biggest, and thickest D operating within the world government today, and that's an institution that does not traditionally favor that particular letter of the alphabet, which we see quite clearly when it was said that Doflamingo would become rather upset if he were to learn about Law's hidden D. In fact, Rocinante had some very intriguing words regarding these there D folk. Back in my hometown, children were scolded into behaving by this threat. If you don't behave, you'll be gobbled up by a D. No one knows the truth, but the name lives on in the dark shadows of history around the world. In one area, the people of the D are known as the enemies of the gods, which is very, very dramatic. But it does make me wonder why the world government is so, well, almost apathetic towards the D peeps, especially those in high positions like the 5 Elder Stars, who almost certainly know whatever this truth business is. And yet when someone named Monkey D. Luffy emerges into the world, he's practically ignored until he does some truly whack crap like crash an old lady's tea party and beat up her son. Son's plural actually, because Luffy took down both Katakuri and Cracker. But with Garp, his purpose to the world government I think is quite clear. Because it's one thing to defeat your enemies and wipe them off the butt cheeks of the planet with the toilet paper of fictional justice, but it's entirely another to subdue those monsters and make them work for you against other monsters. That's what Garp is. He is not only a symbol of strength, hope, and hopefully still looking pretty damn good by the age of 78, he does much more than that, because from the perspective of the world nobles, he is also a symbol of safety, that these D-monsters, perhaps even D-mons or even D-men, are under control. And not only that, but to anyone who does know the truth about the D-clan, it would be a pretty rough psychological blow to know that the greatest hero of the world government is someone who should be their natural enemy. But what I'm more curious about is whether or not Garp knows this. How far does his knowledge of the D D business extent. In theory, Roger and his crew were the only ones who discovered the full truth of the planet, but Garp must be aware of his heritage in some way, shape, or form, or at least questioned why every now and then a new D person pops into the world and causes a big old kerfuffle. Actually, you know what? He has to know, because in his discussion with Law, it is heavily implied that Sengoku knows quite a bit, even going on to imply that he most certainly knows more than Rocinante did, a child who grew up hearing about these monstrous D-folk. And being Garp's BFF, it's very difficult to imagine that this information is being kept from him if he didn't already know via other means. So Garp can't really claim ignorance here. He understands, at least on a vague level, what he is. And even knowing that, he's made the choice to throw his support behind the world government, assumedly believing that maintaining the balance of this system will do more good than throwing everything into anarchy. He's almost like an anti-D in that regard, because one of the commonly thrown around statements within the World Nobles was that a person with the D initial will always cause a storm, and Garp stands in opposition to that, because when news anchor Sengoku says, "And now here's Garp with the weather, how's the storm going, Garp?" we cut to Garp and he just says, "Storm? What storm? I punched it and it went away." Except it's more complicated than that, because he doesn't just exist to snuff out his own heritage, and he seemingly does just as much to enable the D clan as he does to hinder them, like a firefighter who moonlights as an arsonist, just continuously causing himself problems. And there is no greater example of this than the Paramount War. The largest conflict we've ever seen in One Piece to date is more or less a result of Garp's actions. If he didn't adopt Ace, then Whitebeard likely has no reason to go to war, because none of the other crew members would have disobeyed Whitebeard's orders in regards to Thatcher's murder, which put Garp in the most unenviable position of any character at the time in One Piece. His choice during the Paramount War was to either let Ace die and ensure the stability of the world government, as well as the millions of people who live within it, or he could save Ace, but by doing so potentially allow the Whitebeard pirates to emerge victorious and lead to the collapse of the world government and the aforementioned millions of people. It was an impossible choice to make, as shown by the fact that Garp, well, he didn't make a choice, because it was so impossible. He spent the majority of the war in complete mental anguish because he had a core part in constructing this entire scenario, even if it was unintentional. Arguably, there was no correct choice to make, especially because every choice Garp thought was the right thing to do in the past had only led to this outcome anyway. It's pretty depressing, really. Especially when One Piece as a whole tends to focus on how making the right decision today can positively affect tomorrow, mostly through Luffy. He does the right thing in the moment and he's rewarded for that right thing down the line, like when the Straw Hat saves Zoe from Jack. That ended up paying off with Pecoms rescuing Luffy on Whole Cake Island. Sadly, things don't work out quite as nicely for Garp. With him, it's more like everything he does comes back to bite him in the old man ass. And there's something quite striking in that, because Garp is considered a hero of the world, whilst arguably maintaining its villainous nature. And then you have Luffy, who is widely considered to be a villain of the world, but almost selfishly enacting good wherever he sets foot. It's a very generational story. Garp, the old boomer set in his ways, convinced that what we have now is probably the best we'll ever get. And young millennial, maybe now even Zuma Luffy, wants to defy everything because, and I quote, "It'll cramp my style." But in many ways that does make Garp something of a villain, because he is one of the biggest factors that stands between our heroes and the doing of the things it is that they want to do. And whilst his Marineford actions are now set in stone, another crisis of choice is going to emerge for Garp, particularly as his family get closer and closer to overthrowing the world government. Because what we're about to have is a delicious monkey-d sandwich. On one side, we've got Dragon marching on the world nobles in full force, and on the other, we have Luffy leading the charge of the next generation of pirates. And then in the middle, we have the stale deli meat that is Garp. Does that even make sense? Delis are more for fresh meat, aren't they? Let's just not think about it. I'm incredibly curious though, because for all his life, Garp has chosen to defend and even propagate the world government. So when it becomes threatened by the inevitable actions of his entire family tree, will he side with them or against them? Because I'm inclined to believe that it will be with them, but I'm not entirely sure. Garp's arc seems more like it could be a more elongated version of what Fujitora went through on Dressrosa. To enact the greater good, he sided with Doflamingo, but ultimately saw an opportunity for change and decided to bet on Luffy. So when Garp sees that identical opportunity on a much grander scale, does he do the same? Because what's going to happen here will solidify the question we've been asking this entire video. Garp is going to have the choice to stand against the world government and become a true hero, or stick to his current ideology and become one of the final villains. Because when you think about it, there is one very integral thing that we don't know about Garp. What is his brand of justice? Each Marine has their own personal style of justice. Sakazuki and his edgy posse practice absolute justice, whereas Fujitora Fujitora has a policy of humane justice, which is the exact opposite. He will always prioritize the well-being of innocent people over the grander cause. And then there's Kizaru, who has adopted the art of unclear justice, which, just as the name implies, is unclear and seemingly arbitrary, which is, well, it's less than helpful. But Garp's personal moral compass has not been revealed to us as of yet. So I asked all of you to tell me what it is, and we had some genuinely amusing answers, such as donut justice and fisting justice. Donut justice being a reference to when Garp attempted to break the world record for eating donuts. He got to a mighty 842 before he was forced to back down, and I can only assume that the current champion is Charlotte Katakuri. But the justice I think suits Garp best is the whatever feels right at the moment justice, which I feel like we could give a much better name, like say impulsive justice, but it implies that Garp doesn't operate with broad strokes, he just applies justice on a case-by-case basis. Kind of like how you judge YouTube videos, and here is another one for you. Because there's always more to learn, explore, and experience with this wonderful series, so I look forward to seeing you there.